Hey, well, it's
Oh,
4 o'clock, and I think we should get started. So it's exciting and a little intimidating to have such great interest in this topic, and I thank you all for being here. Uh, the first thing I want to say is that we are recording this, and you'll be able to have access to the slides. It'll probably take me a day or so to get them up, but you'll get email when they're ready. You can also send me email at the address on the screen anytime you have a question that I haven't answered in class, or if you have any feedback of any sort, I always welcome that. And with that, let's get rolling here. So the theme for this week is now with AI, and that was inspired by the cover of a magazine, MIT Technology Review from January of 2024. And I loved the artwork for the article or for the cover, which included the cereal box that says now with AI. So, with a little help from my AI friends, I created this graphic. And you can clearly see that everything except a rock has AI. But hey, it's like opening a box of chocolates. You never know for sure what you're going to get inside. So you don't know what's in the rock. Anyway, here's the plan of the day. And we'll take a break around 5. And at the end of the first section, we'll take uh, questions. And it's a big class. So please put the questions in chat. And I'm hoping that I've left enough time for everybody to ask plenty of questions and get answers. Uh, there there is a little bit of important safety note here. I do suffer from terminal too much information. I always have more information I want to share than available time. So my slides tend to be kind of dense, but my goal is to highlight the key ideas, but then have them available for you to study further if you would like to do that. So onward, let me give you a little background on myself and why I'm doing this. Uh, there's just two things I want to highlight on this resume. One is that I've been involved with computer systems for a long time now. Uh, and although wrote my first program in 1964, I've never worked as a professional software engineer, nor have I been a researcher in AI. But I've been around computer systems a long time, and I've had a pretty deep interest in the social impact of technology for a long time too. When I started teaching it in the UCLA Computer Science Department in 1980, I started an informal study group on the social impact of computing. This is actually the sixth class I've taught for CI, and the last three have been on sixth class I've taught for CRI, and the last three have been on the subject of AI, but all of them have had a theme of social impact as part of the story. Oh, and there's one other thing I should mention. Indeed, it is true that when I was an electronics officer in the Navy, I had a dune buggy with a flower print top. And that dune buggy I built when I was a senior in college. And it became something of an obsession when I was doing that, to the point where the dean of engineering stopped me one day and said, "Why, Terry, I see you've taken time from building your Manx to come visit us." There are many stories that go with that car, but I thought you might enjoy seeing a picture of it. And the chagrin of the Marine Guards at Naval Station San Diego, who had to salute the car because of the blue officer sticker on it. Anyway, I decided to include this because a couple of months ago, Google updated their Gemini AI platform with some enhanced photo editing capabilities. And I got this email from them that said that I should tell Gemini I'm going to upload an image of myself, and then it's going to give me a realistic looking alien next to me. Well, I decided to upload a picture of my beloved Manx instead, and so this was the result. So if you get nothing else out of this class, you know what a realistic looking alien looks like, at least according to Google Gemini. So why am I doing this? Well, the story starts in the spring of 2023, and I attended a lecture at UW, sponsored by the computer science department there. And the speaker was Sebastian Bubeck, who at the time was working at Microsoft Research. And they had gotten early access to the next generation of ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT was unleashed on the world in November of 2022, and that was version 3.5. Well, Microsoft Research had gotten access to evaluate version 4. And it turns out there was a team from the podcast This American Life that was also looking over their shoulder, trying to learn what they had discovered. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But I got to the lecture early and sat in the back because I wanted to see what the crowd was going to be like. And as you can tell from this photo, it was way beyond standing room only. Good thing there wasn't a fire marshal around. Even better thing that there wasn't a fire. But I think everyone that left the room that day felt that something important was going on here. This was something different. And then the next thing that happened, about a month later, 60 Minutes did a segment on how people were being scammed by people who were impersonating family members using AI technology to spoof the voice of a loved one and then convince the family member that they were in trouble and needed money. And you can take it from there, you know how that story ends. And when I saw that, I realized this is actually pretty serious, and people need to know about what's going on with this stuff. So shortly after that, I sent a proposal for a class to the CRI curriculum committee, and that was the beginning of my sequence here. So my perspective on all this is shaped by my career in systems engineering and technology management. And during those years, I learned 3 rules. Rule one, is that technology is a two-edged sword. Always has been, always will be. It's got its good sides and it's got its bad sides. Rule number 2 is that neither politicians nor technologists can change rule 1, even though they keep trying. And rule 3 is that to a first approximation, there are no technical problems. There are only people problems. So I'm going to share a few of my own personal convictions, not to try to convince you I'm right, but just by way of full disclosure on what my own biases are. And starting with the idea that humanity is fundamentally good, but can be taught otherwise, and that we're dealing with machines here, and machines are not human, no matter how well they might mimic us. And perceptions are as important as realities. In fact, as a manager, I learned that perceptions are realities and have to be dealt that way, with that way. So guarding our own sense of humanity and identity is crucial. And as we go through this class. I think that'll be reinforced. I also believe that alignment of these systems with human values is probably the most fundamental challenge of AI. Uh, and it's related to my belief that erosion of a shared sense of truth and a shared trust is probably our most fundamental societal risk. And AI is potentially a serious uh, accelerator of those trends. And finally, I believe with all my heart that optimism is a force for good. So I try to practice that and encourage others to as well, even when times are dark. So onward. Here's the plan for the class. This week, we're going to talk about why is this such a big deal, and then go over some of the fundamentals, concepts of AI and how it's evolved. And then we'll start talking about some of the current headlines around are we in a bubble or not? And what are the real issues that people are arguing about? The next week, the theme will be let's get practical. And we'll talk about how it's been used successfully, examples from others, how they're using it, and then we'll try to get some hands-on and I'll share with you some of my own experiences. And then in week 3, we'll wrap up with hopefully not too much of a downer, but we're going to look at some of the real challenges and hopefully some of the ways that they can be addressed as well. And finally, what makes me hopeful. So there's the plan. And let's get going into what's the big deal here. And the context is we're talking about this thing called artificial intelligence. And we're going to be focusing primarily on one particular kind of artificial intelligence called generative AI. And that includes the chatbots that I suspect you're all familiar with, including ChatGPT, which is sort of the big dog on the block. That was the first one that really set the world afire. It was not the first chat bot, by the way. We'll get into that, but it's certainly the one that triggered the revolution that we're seeing. There are others like Claude, and we'll talk about some of them in just a moment. But remember, these are computer programs that often pretend to be people, but they're not people. They assume a persona of being your assistant or your collaborator, maybe a reference librarian, maybe a friend, but they're computer programs. Now, since they like to pretend to be people and pretend to be friendly, it's reasonable to say, well, what is your mission, Mr. Chatbot? And so I decided to ask them. And I asked ChatGPT, and it said its mission was to help people think with clarity, curiosity, compassion. Perplexity, another platform, says also to help people think, but more clearly and faster and make better decisions than they would otherwise. Gemini, which is Google's platform for AI, is to make information accessible and useful, which is very consistent with their original corporate mission of organizing the world's information and making it accessible. Now, Copilot had perhaps the most ambitious mission, which was to be your most insightful, intuitive, and inspiring companion. Sounds good to me. I'll take 2. On the other hand, Claude was much more modest in its mission. In fact, it objected to the mission phraseology. It said, I don't have a life against which to compare my progress on a mission. I just want to be genuinely helpful to whoever I'm talking with and be a good conversation partner. So there you have it. Now, you don't need to know how these things work to use them any more than you need to know exactly how a modern car works or how an airplane works in all of its details to be able to use them. But I would claim that by learning a little bit about how they work, you'll better understand their limitations and their risks. And that's what I hope to be able to share with you in the next 3 sessions so we'll be together. However, there are many crucial questions that are going to come up that have no agreed upon answer, only strongly held opinions. And I have some of those too. The correct answer in many cases will just depend on who you ask. And some of these important answers depend on your own philosophical and religious perspective, because AI can get us into pretty deep questions about what it means to be human, which we will talk about in the last session. So let's go back to this lecture in early 2023. I mentioned that This American Life podcast folks were there talking to Microsoft. And the example I'm about to show you was part of the episode that they released in June of that year, which is worth going back and listening to. David Kessenbaum was a senior editor, and he asked, he said, I think everyone, once they start playing around with something like ChatGPT, has a kind of holy blank moment. And for him, it was when he typed this into ChatGPT. It said, give me a chocolate chip cookie recipe, but written in the style of a very depressed person. And I apologize for reading PowerPoint slides, but I think it's kind of fun to read this response. Ingredients, 1 cup butter softened, if you can even find the energy to soften it. 1 teaspoon vanilla extract, the fake artificial flavor of happiness. 1 cup semi-sweet chocolate chips, tiny little joys that will eventually just melt away. Kessenbaum said, it was really quite good. I did not understand how it was possible. And neither did the people at Microsoft Research. And in fact, even today, understanding in detail how these systems can come up with such surprising results is an unsolved problem. Why is it a big deal? Well, Bill Gates believes it's a big deal. He said it's bigger than the personal computing revolution. The current CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, says it's a big deal, at least as important as the PCs, the web, mobile, smartphones, the cloud. Well, that's pretty steep competition. So these guys believe this is big. And they put their money where their mouth is, or at least Satya Nadella put Microsoft's money where his mouth is. They put $13 billion into OpenAI in 2023. And back then, $13 billion was a sizable chunk of change. Now, today's standards in the AI investment world, that's chump change. But back then, it was a huge investment and pretty controversial. Now, look at what's happening this year. This is what these various companies are going to be putting into capital expenditures to support AI growth. 400 billion from Meta, that's the Facebook folks. Oracle, they're in the data center business and they're wanting to be very much a player in the AI business. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they're all well known for having big data centers, but they're really, really big data centers that they're working on now to support AI. Well, let's look at OpenAI in particular. That's the company behind ChatGPT. And it's headed by this fellow here, Sam Altman. They, as a result of that $13 billion investment, had a partnership with Microsoft that left them with some challenges for how they were actually going to start being a for-profit company. So they've been restructuring, and they just recently finished that restructuring. And it leaves Microsoft with a piece of the company, and the valuation of Microsoft as a result of that is now above $4 trillion. That's not the top of the food chain, though. The company that makes the chips that are used in all the computers that do these AI models is NVIDIA. And NVIDIA is the most valuable company on the market at $5 trillion. And Apple is in the 4 to 5 trillion range too. So these are big guys. Now let's look at some stats around ChatGPT. 800 million weekly active users, over 120 million daily active users. They process a billion queries every day, 15.5 million paid subscribers. And that's against the 800 million unpaid users. That is the freebies, and 1.5 million enterprise contracts. The company is expecting to make over $13 billion this year, income from those paid subscriptions and the enterprise uses and a few other things. But they're not profitable and don't expect to be until 2030 because they're spending so much money to put new infrastructure in place to support their anticipated growth. And in fact, Sam Altman has stated just in the last few weeks that their goal is to spend $1 trillion a year on new infrastructure. Now, the impact of AI is not just on jobs, and we're not going to go into details on this. It's a taxonomy that's just there to give you a sense that it's hard to imagine any aspect of our lives that really isn't going to be touched in some way by AI. And in fact, the CEO of Walmart on the jobs front said, maybe there's a job in the world that AI won't change, but I haven't thought of it. What about baseball? Do you have any baseball fans around? Well, an Oakland minor league club has a CEO that said, what would happen if we had AI be the manager for a game? And so it's kind of a gimmick and an experiment. They had an AI manager make the calls, and the reports were that did a decent job. He said it was a one-off. They're not going to do it again. But there's no area that is immune to impact by AI. Now, how fast it's going to impact is a big question. The rate of adoption estimates are all over the map. And one reason for that is an old adage I learned in the management world, which is that culture eats strategy for lunch. In other words, you may have a plan to deploy AI throughout an organization, but sometimes those plans run into a culture that resists change. Who knew? And that can slow things down quite a bit. Or you might discover that it's actually a lot harder than what you were promised. So there's a lot of uncertainty around timelines in this area. But I think every CEO would probably agree that business as usual is over. And how soon and how dramatic the shifts are still to be determined. So now let's look at some of the fundamental concepts here. What is it? Well, the term artificial intelligence was coined by professor of computer science, John McCarthy, back in 1955. At the time, he was at Dartmouth, and he co-authored a proposal to fund a workshop to study this new field, which he called in that proposal, artificial intelligence, in which he defined as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. Now, there are lots of variations on that theme. I like a more recent definition that I came across, which is the simulation of human intelligence processes by machines. No matter how you define it, there's a question of where does it fit on this spectrum between, is it just math or is it magic? Well, there's some of the results that sure look like magic, but when you get right down to the basics, it's math. And how much of one or the other depends on your perspective and how you're using it and what sorts of results you're seeing. But I think it's fair to say that AI is essentially automation. It's a tool. It's also a technology and surely a business and unquestionably a hype machine, and for some people, an ideology. It is not magic. It's not a panacea, and it's not an exception to rule one that technology is always a two-edged sword. And it is not yet, and may never be, conscious, sentient, or an existential threat to our existence. Time will tell on that. Another definition of what is AI comes from a computer science professor at Princeton who says AI is whatever hasn't been done yet. And he points out that we have been using AI in many forms, and we don't even think about it that way anymore. And for example, Google Maps, which goes back almost 20 years, uh, Siri, which is the Apple smart assistant, 2011. And even before that, there were personalized recommendation engines for Netflix and expert systems that were used in industry to help configure products and so on. Speech and handwriting recognition, spam filtering, grammar and spell checking, et cetera, et cetera. These are all using different forms of AI that are just sort of faded in the word work, and we don't really think of them specifically as AI anymore. Now, I said that it's automation, and we've seen the automation movie before. We've all of those items that Satya Nadella said are going to pale in comparison to AI, the personal computer revolution, smartphones, et cetera. These technology shifts, starting with moving the mass of the workforce from farms to the industrial era, they always have in the past created more jobs than they eliminated. But they did it on a long time scale. It took 150 years from the time when 95% of the workforce was working on a farm to now when fewer than 1% feed the remaining 99%. But now the question is this time different? Are more jobs going to be created than are eliminated? And over what time period? The answer to the first question is not known. There are many people that say, I don't see why this one will be any different. But for sure, the time scale is different. And another thing that's different is in the past, it's been usually the blue collar workers or the field workers that have been replaced by machines. AI is unusual in that it's the white collar workers that are going to feel the effect first. We don't have robots that can pick fruit as cheaply or effectively as human beings or work on houses, etc. So here's my attempt to give you a taxonomy of the world of AI. And on the left is what's called classical AI or symbolic AI. And symbolic, oops, too fast. Symbolic AI really has to do with just using human readable labels for things like the door is blue, as opposed to just dealing with numbers. And in this world, the programmer creates the logic and puts it into the program, and then it processes data according to the rules that are built into the program. Now, this other side, the machine learning side, which came a little later, is about trying to have programs that learn patterns from data from the bottom up. They don't have the patterns built into the program. They analyze the data and try to understand the relationships and the patterns within that data. And early on, that was done with statistical methods, mathematics that tries to find curves that will fit a series of data points, for example, so that you could extrapolate when the next storm might occur or when the next failure of a piece of equipment might be based on a history of failures in a factory. The next breakthrough was what's called neural network machine learning, or also known as deep learning. And this is really the basis of the generative AI tools that we'll be talking about, ChatGPT and the others. And both of these kinds of models can create two flavors of result. The discriminative models, which are the ones that categorize things or make predictions about weather or your most likely favorite movie, etc. And the generative models, which is why ChatGPT got so much buzz, and they actually create new content as opposed to just classifying things. So I came across a video which I think did a better job of explaining this than I could. So we're going to take a couple of minutes here and watch this video.
Hi, I'm Dion. I'm one of the creators of Forethought AI. At Forethought, we build artificially intelligent tools that people can use at work to be more productive. To make a learning machine, early computer scientists looked for clues by studying other things that are good at learning. And it turns out that nothing is better at learning than the human brain. Our brains are made up of special cells called neurons. A neuron has two ends. Input signals enter in on one end, they're combined together inside the neuron, and leave the other end as a single output. All of the billions of neurons in your brain are connected to each other in what's called a biological neural network. It's how your brain processes information and recognizes patterns. Early AI scientists decided to mimic human neurons by making their own simple artificial neurons and software. Nothing fancy, just multiple signals going in as inputs, passing through the neuron, and getting combined and processed by some simple math into a new signal going out. And it's a good start. But one neuron alone doesn't do much. The full potential of this idea is only unleashed when the artificial neurons are connected together to make an artificial neural network. This is what allows computers to recognize images, drive cars, and make some truly weird art. To see how a neuron works, let's build a movie recommendation system that uses critics' reviews to guess how much you'll like a movie. Then we'll use your feedback to make the system better. Here are 3 movie critics, Ali, Bowie, and Casey. Each one rates a movie anywhere from 1 to 5 stars. Now let's build a single artificial neuron. Each of the critics' ratings enters on this side as input. Some calculations are done in here, and we get a single output. In this case, it's a movie rating. Here's the first movie. Ali gives it 1 star, Bowie gives it 5, and Casey gives it a 4-star review. At first, the critics' opinions all carry the same weight and are counted equally. The inputs enter, there's some basic math, and out comes a recommendation. Now, let's watch the movie so we can give it our own rating. Okay, that was weird. Let's pretend you really liked it and gave it a 5-star rating. The rating you just provided is now used to train the neuron. Based on your rating, the weight of each critic's opinion is recalculated. Your rating is closer to that of Bowie and Casey, so their opinions get more weight. You didn't agree with Ali's single-star review, so that weight goes down. Now let's train the neuron again. Here's another movie. And here are new ratings from our critics. And this time, the neuron will give more weight to these 2 ratings when calculating its recommendation. And here's the output. Now let's give it a watch. Well, at least that was short. Let's give it a rating. Our new rating adjusts the weights again. This process repeats over and over until we've trained a system to know our preferences and recommend movies that we'll probably enjoy. In this example, there's just one neuron. That's far more simplistic than most systems. Powerful neural networks have millions of neurons arranged in layers. There are input layers, any number of hidden layers, and output layers. The output of one layer of neurons becomes the input to the next layer, and so on. Many real-world media, music, and shopping recommendation systems work like this, using ratings from millions of everyday users. In those neural networks, everyone has a hand in modifying the weights. Neural networks have so many other uses. They're working behind the scenes on big problems like growing healthier food, predicting floods and forest fires, aiding wildlife conservation, and even detecting and curing disease.
Okay. Here I'm going to attempt to give you the 4 or 5 bullet summary of what you need to know. We're going to focus on large language models in where we go from here, such as GPT-5, which is the latest from OpenAI. And in case you're wondering, GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And we're not going to go into what that really means, but it's a type of large language model architecture. And there are others, but this is the type that almost all of the major platforms are focusing on at this time. So you start by creating a neural network computer program, or you can think of it as a model brain. Then you train it. You feed lots and lots of data to it, like, for example, all the text you can find on the internet, at least all that's publicly accessible. There's still a lot of text that is behind corporate firewalls and so on. Then once you've trained your model, then you or your customers can send it what are called prompts, and the system will then generate what it considers to be the most likely output from the prompt that you have sent it when it's analyzing it in the context of all of the data that it has been trained on. Now, unlike most programs The result is not deterministic. That means if you give it the same prompt again, you will likely get a different result. That's not what you want to have happen when you run a spreadsheet program or any other industrial control program or anything where you have a certain set of inputs and you want to have the same answer, uh, whether the sun is shining or not, or what day of the week it is. Generative AI is different. As even though the video didn't go into some of the details of how it's used in the text generation context, but what happens is that the system ends up with a set of potential outputs that it gives a probability rating to. And it's trying to figure out what's the most probably useful or correct set of character strings to give as the result for the given input. And depending upon the threshold of the probabilities, it may have a clear winner or it may have several that are kind of close and it isn't sure. And so then it could give you a different one. And sometimes that's a really good thing. If you're asking it to generate a draft condolence note or thank you note, and we can talk about the ethics of that later. But suppose you do, you might want it to give you more than one choice to choose from or to edit from. Same thing with an image. You might ask for an image with cats in the foreground and rabbits in the background and some trees. And you might want it to offer you several choices to work from. So that's the probabilistic nature of the beast. And it's kind of like autocomplete when you're typing away in a texting program or an email, uh, but it can appear surprisingly intelligent. So, what's the bottom line on these large language models? They're not just looking stuff up in a giant database or searching the web. They're doing computations that is integrating all of the data that it's been trained on and trying to figure out from that training data what is the most likely string of characters, and if it's a text situation, that will respond to the input that it's been given. It can exhibit very human-like reasoning and creativity, way more surprising than you'd expect from autocomplete on steroids. But it also makes stuff up. It hallucinates. That's the term of art in the AI world for making stuff up. And it can mirror not only good traits of humans, but some of the worst. And this is an important point. The details of how it actually works are still not well understood. So when you get a result, can you say, well, how did you get that result? Up to a point, yes. You can go back and ask it to check, to show its work, to show the steps it went through. And that can be helpful, but there's also evidence that it doesn't really necessarily reveal the details of what's going on under the covers. So this is still a research area to really understand how what's going on in the black box. Now, this is a quote that came out shortly after the original ChatGPT was released, and I still think it's one of the best. It's from a professor at Wharton. He says, the best way to think about this is you're chatting with an omniscient, eager to please intern who sometimes lies to you. Now, I do have one friendly amendment to that, because the term lies to you implies intent. And intent implies sentience or consciousness. We're dealing with a computer program. It doesn't have feelings. It's not sentient. It does not have intent. It can simulate that from its training, but the phrase make stuff up is probably a better one than lies to you. Let's look at how some of the expectations and the technologies have evolved over the years. On the technology side, we started in the 60s with these symbolic AI systems. Uh, very, very basic. If X and Y, then Q or whatever. These are sometimes called the good old-fashioned AI. In the 70s, the era of machine learning. And these are systems that attempt to learn from the data, learn from their experience without having to be explicitly programmed for different situations. Now, there are limitations to that even today, even with the latest and best AI models. They're still specialized to particular situations. That's why when Waymo or one of the other autonomous vehicle companies moves to a new city, they can't just take their cars and drop them on the roads of, let's say, Seattle, where I gather they're coming soon, because they have to learn the territory. And so they have to go through extensive, both simulated and real training periods in each new area to learn the details of that environment. If it was truly a general purpose problem solver, if the AI was that good, it would know how to respond to new conditions. And just like a human would be able to drive in a new city without having been specially trained. Although I think if you're going to drive in Boston, you might need some special training. But anyway, after machine learning, we got into the world of deep learning. And that's where we're using these layers of neural networks to deal with very complicated patterns. And finally, the era of generative AI. And this really was triggered in part by this concept of GANs, or generative adversarial networks. And what that's about is taking two different systems. One of them is the target system that's being trained and trying to come up with the right answer. And another system, which is the coach or the judge. And what happens is the target system generates, it's given some input, and it guesses a result. And the coach or the referee system says, nope, that's not it. Try again. And so it goes this repetitive cycle of trying to adjust its weights and all these different neurons in the system until it guesses the right output. And that's the part of the training process. And then the referee system says, okay, you got it. Let's go on to the next input. And it repeats this millions and millions and millions of times. And all the times it's readjusting its weights in the model until you end up with what's called a foundation model that can take new inputs and have a high probability of getting useful output from it. So on the capability side, what we have now, which we called artificial intelligence, is technically referred to as artificial narrow intelligence or weak intelligence, because it can master specific tasks like generating images or being able to summarize books or to read handwriting, things like that. But it can't take that car into a new, unfamiliar environment and safely drive it there. or do so many other things that we don't even have to think about doing. So now, you may have heard of the term AGI, or artificial general intelligence, or strong intelligence. And that's the idea of AGI being able to equal human ability and be put into a variety of different situations and perform as well as a human. That's the one that's supposed to be able to take all of our jobs. And some people think that's right around the corner. Some people think it's a decade away. Some people think it ain't happening. And then beyond that, there's this concept of artificial superintelligence, where these really amazingly super intelligent creations exceed our ability in every way, and there's no way to turn back. And you find yourselves in this world where it's sometimes called the singularity, where the snowball is going down the hill, and either these things are going to make us superhuman beings or decide we're not needed and move on without the human race, depending upon uh, who you want to believe. These are additive technologies. They don't replace the old ones, but uh, many of the old ones are still in use today. So expectations have been evolving from the early, somewhat cynical view of stochastic parrots, which is the term that was coined by a professor at UW, and not a fan of thinking that these systems can actually understand language. They're good at parroting or mimicking what they've been taught based on some random math. And from there, we've gone to thinking in terms of simulated intelligence, and maybe getting to human intelligence, maybe someday human consciousness, maybe someday synthetic life. How can we tell if we're dealing with something synthetic or not? And does it matter? Those are questions that we'll talk about more in the third week. So where are we in this continuous stairway to something? Um, I think we're right between the eager intern who lies to you and the trustworthy assistant. The CEO of Google has recently been using the term artificial jagged intelligence instead of general intelligence to point out that these things are very specialized today. They're trained to work well in certain settings, but they're not general. They're not adaptive and autonomous and self-learning. And are we going to get to sentient beings with feelings and personhood? Some of us think that's a bridge too far and isn't going to happen. Others do. We'll see. It's important to point out that intelligence is not the same as consciousness. There's no question that these systems are becoming very intelligent. It's not the same as saying that they will inevitably become conscious. So, have humans had their day? Uh, a friend sent me a news item on advances in robotics and posed the point, well, let's try to enjoy the final phase of the Anthropocene while we can. I didn't know what that meant, so I looked it up, and turns out that's the term for a proposed new geologic epoch characterized by significant human impact on Earth's systems. So he said, have we come up with a working title for what comes next, like the Robotocene? Well, I didn't think the Robotocene was general enough, so I proposed the Synthetocene, because we're definitely entering the world of synthetic reality. And it is going to be hard to tell what is real or authentic and what isn't. And then if we finally decide that maybe our human brains are actually an early form of artificial intelligence, then we're going to need another epoch after that, which I nominate the name Neo-Synthesine for that. So here we are, moving into the the brave new world of synthetic reality. And with that, let's take some questions here. How do AI platforms get the data that lies behind paywalls? Some of them, I have read, have established certain relationships with the entities that are behind the paywall, and some of them probably know tricks to avoid the paywall boundaries, which individual users sometimes know how to do too, like turning off JavaScript in your browser. Um, there are huge issues around copyright and whether it's fair use to scrape the web, is the term, and use that for training. And we'll get into that in week 3 more. But most people, I think, are seeing copyright as a potential big deal for the companies to have to face. And that's why a lot of them are working hard right now to establish licensing relationships with the publishers to try to head off some of the statutory damages that could accrue from a negative result in the courts. And there are a number of cases that are still pending on that. Do you think a large company, oh, can you train with all the books in a library? Well, according to one of the few major uh, copyright decisions that came down this year, the court held that it is possible for an AI generated work to be transformational in the language of the Copyright Act and therefore eligible for the fair use exception to copyright. However, the court also found that if the materials that were used to train the model were not correctly purchased, then that's theft. So unless they actually bought the books from the publisher, they might be on shaky ground, and taking it out of a library or uh, digital or otherwise might not pass muster with the court. But I think this is still, jury's still out. Let's see. Do you think that a large company like Boeing will train a proprietary AI neural network on all its data in the world of the science and technology of the aerospace systems to leverage its competitive advantage? Yes. I think that any CEO and CIO right now are looking at what are the possibilities and how can we use them to be more productive, more efficient, and stay ahead of our competition. Doesn't the output of AI depend on who is doing the inputting and what is being inputted, even though it's learning as it goes? Yes, the nature of the prompt that you give to the tool very much influences the kind of results you're going to get. And the modern systems have something called retrieval time augmented generation, where they try to incorporate data and web searches into their training material to give you the most up-to-date information. It used to be that when you would ask a question about who's president, you could get the wrong answer because their training data was only current up to a year earlier. But now with so-called RAG and other techniques, they have the ability to pull in information that's more current. But the question about does your input matter is absolutely crucial because, as we'll talk about in the second half, it is an unsolved security problem to deal with something called prompt injection. And that's where somebody surreptitiously manages to get some chunk of instruction into the model before your prompt or your request gets to it and influences the output. So, for example, uh, you go to a website and it's going to do a survey and it wants to know your views on some hot political topic. And it wants you to indicate, are you on the red side or the blue side? And what would you think about this? And unbeknownst to you, the website operator wants to skew the result that you get that's going to influence how you vote. And so it puts in a uh, a prompt injection before your input is processed that says, uh, answer as if you are a MAGA person, or answer as if you are a very progressive person to skew the result that you're going to get. That's a very difficult and unsolved problem. So yes, the way you phrase the prompt, what you ask it to do, and the context you give it very much will influence the output you get.
Terry, there was one more question right at the beginning. AI platforms being developed in a for-profit competitive market. Can we
Yes.
trust? Do you see that one? Do you see
Yes.
that? Okay, thank you.
Can we trust the output of these platforms? That is, will we the public, have safeguards against being manipulated and used by the owners? There are books being written on this very issue. One of them is called The AI Con, which is co-authored by Emily Bender at UW, who is the person that coined the term uh, uh, stochastic parrot as a somewhat pejorative way of thinking about these models. But the concern that these are first and foremost going to be money-making engines is very real and of great concern to many people. Uh, so there is a caveat emptor element to all this. And I don't think we know exactly how that's going to play out or what the most effective defensive measure for the consumer is going to be. Obviously, well, it seems obvious to me, legislation is needed in a lot of these areas relating to safety and consumer protection. Uh, and that does not exist yet today. So we're still in the Wild West on that one. And moving to the last question, can we assume that some of the AI tools will have bias towards their owners, Meta, Microsoft, Google, with prompt results be fair and true? An excellent question. You may be aware that Elon Musk's company, XAI, has their own chatbot called Grok or XGrok. And there were reports that, at least for a while, its answers were very much aligned with those of the owner of the company. And in fact, they have created their own Grokopedia to compete with Wikipedia. And it is alleged by some that this is, it's even though intended to be a less biased version than Wikipedia, it can be argued that it might be just the opposite. So I think the concern is valid and right on. Um, and you'll hear me say many times, check your source as the important tool for consumers of this stuff. And some of the companies will have pretty much pure profit motives. Some of them may have ideological motives. And so understanding who you're dealing with is going to be important. When it comes time to buy stuff and you're buying things through these chatbots, which is now happening, and certainly what the companies want you to do, it's like with Amazon, and do you pick the first recommended item on their list of recommended products? Well, that's not necessarily the least cost item. And similarly, there will be some hidden agendas in the way the chatbot might choose a product to recommend to you. So these are all relevant questions. And yes, indeed, stay tuned for advertising in some of these systems. It's inevitable. Okay, I think we're out of questions for the moment, and I suggest we take a 5-minute break. All right, I see it is 5:10. So let's jump into the world of AI bubbles. This fellow wrote an article recently saying we're not in an AI bubble, we're in 3 different kinds of AI bubbles simultaneously. One is an asset, a financial speculation kind of bubble, and that's the one most people think about. It's sort of gets its historical roots in the tulip bubble of centuries ago. Although I don't know about you, I've never had a tulip that lasted more than a week, so I don't really understand how that bubble came about. Um, but he also talks about not just the uh, fact that there's a lot of money going into these AI companies, more than perhaps is warranted by their expected rate of return in the future. But we're also seeing a bubble in the infrastructure growth and overbuilding if indeed these companies don't live up to their uh, hype, if you will, or their expectations on growth. And then finally, related to that is the hype bubble of unwarranted adoption. That is, that adoption that is happening uh, based on claims that are not based in fact, that it will do more for the companies than it actually, in fact, will do. So these are, I think, all uh, valid lenses through which to look at the question of AI bubbles. Um, and it turns out that in August, none other than Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, said, yes, AI is in a bubble and someone is going to get burned. Now, rest assured, he's not telling anyone that his company is not a good investment and won't live up to the hype and won't be a great investment. But he's suggesting that not everybody is going to be uh, happy with their investment. Somebody's going to get burned. And this really hinges on the question of exponential growth, because OpenAI is definitely seeing exponential growth right now. But here's an analogy that has been posted uh, recently that I think is instructive. The father says, my 3-year-old son is now twice as big as when he was born. He's on track to weigh 7.5 trillion pounds by age 10. So, is this the kind of exponential growth thinking that is being applied to the AI companies? Well, a month after he said that, yes, their AI is in a bubble, just earlier this week, he said, yeah, but we're going to spend $1 trillion or more in order to keep up with our demand. And we're seeing steep revenue growth, and we're going to have more products, which, by the way, is where some of the ads are undoubtedly going to come in. So this fellow posted on LinkedIn recently a bullish view of what's happening. And I loved the graphic, so I had to include that because he's really talking about a lot of the investment motivation is fear of missing out. Why are you investing? Because you are. And he talks about how there have been a huge number of uh, layoffs in the tech industry just this year. At the same time, almost $500 billion in investment in AI infrastructure, which today is still 30 or 40% utilized. And he says, why are people firing humans to fund idle graphics processing units? CPUs are the chips that are used for AI processing. And he says it's because Wall Street rewards the narrative, not the results. Well, just this week, Business Insider asked 13 different business leaders, are we in a bubble? Here's a shock. They didn't all agree. So pick your source and you can have whichever answer you want. Assuming we are in some form of a bubble or close to one, what's keeping it going? Well, fear of missing out, I think clearly is a big part of it. Commercially, it's concern about your competitors. So OpenAI is concerned about Google and Meta and so on. Uh, Governments are concerned about our adversaries, especially China, and rightly so. Uh, and now we see higher ed is worried that they're going to be left out if they don't jump on the AI bandwagon. So more and more schools, not just higher ed, but K-12 as well. I think it was the California State College system that recently did a deal with OpenAI to get uh, AI, make it available to all of their campuses. Um, So fear of adversaries gaining some advantage, whether it's in profit or weapon systems. There's also potentially a disconnect between the CIOs and CEOs and the folks in the trenches in terms of how realistic are the expectations that the senior executives have at this point. So the competition uh, is about profits for the AI providers and lots of consultants, and for the business users for the hope of productivity increases, which certainly could translate into lower labor costs, which is code for layoffs in significant numbers. Venture capital, of course, is doing their thing, which is to look for the next big thing, put a bunch of money in it, and hope they picked correctly. Wharton just came out with their 2025 AI adoption report just a couple of weeks ago, and it's surprisingly bullish. Well, surprisingly to me, their surveys indicate that uh, a huge percentage of companies think that AI will enhance their employees' skills. Um, Much smaller percent are saying it's going to replace them. On the other hand, they do see, almost half see a risk of declines in skill proficiency. The term of art for that has become de-skilling, and we'll talk about more about that in the third week. Uh, but they're all planning on putting more money into it and that it's going to pay off. And the predictions for next year are uh, very optimistic with payoff in 2 to 3 years is the expectation for 80% of them. So there you have it. Now, we know it's a big thing, but is it a good thing? What are the battle lines? A year or so ago, it was real simple. There were doomers and there were boomers. And the boomers we're talking about here, nothing to do with baby boomers, completely different kind of boomers. These are the folks that are just really bullish and think that AI is booming and needs to keep booming and it's going to be wonderful. Maybe make us immortal, as opposed to the doomers who want us to slow down and think, well, it might kill us all. Now, of course, that dichotomy is way too simple. It's a spectrum. And you can have a lot of different positions between doomer and believer or boomer. But even that's too simplistic because you could have different views depending upon which impact domain that you're talking about. Think back to that matrix that I put up in the first hour, breaking things down to impacts in our very existence or economy or society or ourselves. You might be very bullish and on the boomer side with respect to the impact of AI on the economy, thinking it's really going to transform productivity, make everybody more efficient, make companies more efficient, create new companies, and it's going to be great to the economy. At the same time, you might be very concerned about energy use and the impact on the environment. You might be very much on the doomer side there. I learned this year that there are a huge number of new uh, terms that people have come up with for different points on this spectrum, with the folks on the left side being generally known as decelerationist, thinking we need to slow down and worry more about safety before we worry about uh, making these things even smarter. And on the right-hand side, you have the accelerationists who think, hey, this is going to be great, pedal to the metal, let's go faster. And so you've got now the bloomers and the zoomers. My favorite is the cheerful apocalyptics. Now, these are the folks who believe that these advanced super intelligences are ultimately going to supersede humankind as we know it. It's just the next step in evolution from biological life forms to silicon-based life forms. And that's just fine with them. So um, now you have a new category of people you can talk about at the next dinner party. Now, what makes doomers so gloomy? 2 years ago, yeah, that's right. 2 years ago, this month, there was the first AI safety summit held in London. And the outcome of that safety summit was a list of 9 major concerns they had. The first one is actually the only one that I'm not that concerned about, that evildoers could use AI to create deadly biological chemical weapons. The reason that I'm personally not that concerned about it is because I know someone who did a postdoc with Professor David Baker at UW. You may recall that name. He just recently got the Nobel Prize for computational chemistry and is a superstar researcher at UW in protein folding and development of new uh, biological processes. And apparently, what he told his grad students is that any competent grad student knows how to make deadly biological and chemical weapons. You do not need AI to do it. Now, the counter argument, I suppose, would be that with advanced AI, you might remove the need to have a graduate level education to be able to do it. Uh, but uh, we've faced some of these threats before, and I think the other issues are much more immediate and much more deserving of attention, starting with saturating the internet with unreliable information. That's happening. Fake AI kidnappings. That's happening. That's what the 60 Minutes story was about 2 years ago. Cyber-assisted or AI-assisted cyber attacks, certainly a very real danger, and there's some reports that it's already happening. Lowering the cost of disinformation attacks, without a doubt. Generating very personalized disinformation campaigns. Well, we've already seen that in the political arena of fake videos that are showing a political figure in a bad light or saying something they didn't say. So that's already a reality. Becoming over-reliant on AI to complete critical tasks. We're going to talk about that more in week 3. That's sometimes called the paradox of automation. And it's been a concern for a long time, even predating generative AI. And I became aware of it in the context of flight control systems and problems of becoming too reliant on them. And then undermining human control, which really comes down to the fact that they are very good at persuasion and they can be extremely certain of their incorrect information that they give you. So this is a real and present danger. And then from the point of view of so-called companion bots or using chatbots for friendship, there are all kinds of red flags around that. Again, we'll get into those in week 3. If you are an aficionado of dark humor, you might enjoy this cartoon from 2012. Yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. Would you believe that 3 years later, in 2015, Sam Altman, the president of or CEO of OpenAI, said, AI will most likely lead to the end of the world, but in the meantime, there will be great companies created. Now, I suspect he had a wry smile when he said that, and it was intended to be some dark humor. But it's an issue for certainly for people that think that the potential of these systems is there to do enormous damage to mankind. This is actually a frame out of a presentation that Gary Marcus, who's the person in the corner there, delivered. And he's been a longtime critic of the current approach to AI and thinking that the LLM, the large language model architectures that are used, can ever live up to the hype and give us artificial general intelligence. And he's got a pretty good track record of being more right than the predictors that AGI is just around the corner. On the other hand, boomers, the enthusiasts, have concerns too. If you are a proponent of moving faster, then you're concerned about things that might slow you down. And so from a corporate point of view, you're concerned about, well, what happens if we don't solve this hallucination problem and people get tired of getting wrong answers from their questions from their AI chatbot? Or more immediately relating to their pocketbook, what if they lose these cases about copyright law and are faced with multi-billion-dollar statutory damages, which the New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI and Microsoft, I think, would certainly be talking some serious money. And then resource use. Is there going to be enough power to run these data centers that they're building? And we're talking about huge data centers and even enough data or dollars or people. And then finally, will the money machine dry up? So these are the things that if you are a boomer you might be worried about because it might slow down progress. Um, and they're also concerned about these perennial safety and fairness issues. But it's a question of emphasis and priority. And you see overlap between both the concerns of the doomers and the boomers in that respect. There is a middle road position I want to point out between the boomers and doomers, and that's uh, given the name AI as normal technology by these two folks that are computer science professors at Princeton. I mentioned one of them earlier. Is that they wrote a book together called AI Snake Oil, trying to warn people about the hype of AI and how it can be very dangerous when it's used for predictive analytics, like whether or not someone is likely to offend again when these systems are being used in the legal system to make life-changing decisions. And they, in their book, point out why there's no basis for believing that these systems are any better than flipping a coin. But they want to us embrace a view of technology of AI as not this thing that's either going to lead to utopia or dystopian end, but rather it's going to increasingly be just part of our normal environment. And it was Narayanan that used the term AI is what we call those things we can't do yet, as the definition of AI has evolved over time. And I have a lot of sympathy for this perspective. But what do the people say? Well, Pew recently did a survey of people's attitudes about AI, and they found that uh, people are more concerned about the consequences than excited about using it in their everyday life. And that has become even more so over the last 2 or 3 years. In other words, when they did the earlier surveys, uh, there were uh, fewer people worried than there are now. A large number, or a larger share, I should say, are concerned that AI is going to really erode their ability to think creatively or form meaningful relationships or solve difficult problems. Uh, on the other hand, they're very open to having help with day-to-day tasks, and they think it should be great for weather forecasting and new medicines, not so much for religion and matchmaking issues. And finally, they feel that it's important to be able to tell whether you're dealing with something that was generated by AI. But many don't trust their own ability to spot AI generated content, nor should they, because it's really difficult and it's getting harder every day. So I'm going to wrap up now with a review of last year compared to 2024. And what we saw happening in 2024 was as follows. Certainly significant and rapid advances. Certainly examples of impressive benefits and examples of some stunning failures and risks as well. Big increase in investments. More worries about whether a bubble was forming, even back then. More debate about the limits and the risks. More debate about how do you regulate? How much do you regulate in order to mitigate those risks? And of course, the unrelenting hype that now everything is now with AI. Okay, that was 2024. Now, in sharp contrast, in 2025, we had exactly the same things. All of those were true in 2025. Deja vu? Well, yes and no, because there were a bunch of new things in 2025 as well. People became more aware of the limits of large language models in terms of the problem of hallucination or factuality, which is the opposite of hallucination. This problem of prompt injection that I mentioned earlier that can really be a serious uh, safety and security concern. The fact that these models don't have any worldview, they don't know where they are in the world, they don't know the context that they're in. And these are all under active research, these problems, but they're unsolved at the moment. We did see some new methods and new approaches being investigated, especially with respect to high reliability systems. And one of the ones that I'm intrigued about came out of the MIT robotics lab. And these folks have been studying AI for a while in the context of autonomous vehicles. And this is an area, as they point out, that you don't want a lot of a hallucination. You would like the model to be reliable in what it returns. So they've been studying how to approach this, and they've come up with a different architecture that they call liquid foundation models. And we're not going to go into it. I don't have enough understanding to explain it very well, but it's based on some different assumptions, modeled after some very simple biologic organisms that they've applied signal processing and mathematical tools to have much higher reliability of the results. So that's an encouraging step. There is a huge amount of action around the concept of agentic AI. And you would think that that was invented this past year, but actually it's the reemergence of agentic AI. Siri, which is the tool that you know that Apple purchased and used in their iPhones as an early AI assistant, the founders of that company had as their vision to go beyond the search engines of the day and to create the first do engine. The search engines would respond to your prompts and give you relevant information. It would give you links that you could go and get your answers. What they wanted to do is develop the first systems that would actually do stuff for you, like turn on lights as a result of a natural language request, etc. Well, that was the earlier example of agentic AI, AIs that will actually go and be your agent to do stuff. And now this has reemerged with full force, and OpenAI is leading the charge, and they have now uh, a version of their system that will look over your shoulder while you're working at your computer and notice what's on the screen and maybe suggest things that you might want to do. Or you could say to it, I want you to order some items from Walmart or from a grocery store, and it will learn more about your preferences and where you normally shop and so on and so forth. And it will actually take action and navigate to the store's website, go through the menus to find the ones that it needs to look at your purchase history if necessary, and then get stuff that you want in a shopping cart and then present you with a click here and it'll be delivered. So that's here now. And OpenAI calls their system Atlas. And the question, of course, is, let me get this straight. You're giving people, giving these AI systems complete control over your computer to act on your behalf. Now, what could possibly go wrong? So, this is state of the art. This is the frontier. You're going to hear about this more and more. Uh, and I think a fair amount of skepticism would be appropriate. Say, where are the safeguards? Where are the controls? And of course, OpenAI is well aware of this, and they've got a credible story about the safeguards, and you're always going to be in the loop before it charges your credit card, so on and so forth. But there be dragons in these waters. So, okay, now orchestration is another term that's showing up now, and that the idea there is that you can uh, have an AI system designed in such a way that it can take advantage of small specialized models that are good at particular kinds of things. And you can have the system take your request and parse it into different parts of the problem, and then orchestrate these other models to do different parts. So maybe there's a part that requires doing some algebra. And so you might want to marshal an AI model that's particularly well trained on doing math, because not all of them are good at math, and so on. And so orchestration is kind of a big deal, and it should result in better answers and also be more efficient because it can use smaller specialized models than trying to have one big model that does everything. A next trend you'll see is embedding applications within the AI platform. And here again, OpenAI is at the forefront of trying to do this. They would like their platform to be your next operating system, essentially replacing the functionality of Windows. So within the OpenAI platform, you would be able to start a web browser or start a Zoom session or start whatever you want, but your AI chatbot would be over your shoulder, trying to help facilitate and be managing that whole process and gathering information on how to help you with other tasks. So this embedding external tools within the platform is another trend to watch for. Now, we've talked about large language models. Small language models are also very important. And what we're seeing is that actually there are already a lot of them there. And the idea of the small language model is you tune a foundation model for a certain application space and you refine it and you kind of carve out all of the training stuff that isn't relevant and you squeeze it down so that you can run it on your phone. And Google has been working on this for a long time and others too. And so small language models are one of the big trends of the year for sure. Now, research into how to understand what's going on inside the black box, the transparency problem, or how to actually do reasoning and how to deal with hallucination. These are all active areas of research, as they should be. On the other hand, there's clearly been huge progress in the quality of the images that they can produce. Uh, and I'll show you examples of that next week. Music and video generation too is just improving by leaps and bounds with each new version of these systems. Now we're also seeing the impact of AI chatbots on the status quo of the internet marketplace. In the old days, you would do a Google search or a Bing search, and you would get a list of links back, and you would click on the link to go to a website, and you would see some ads, and looking at those ads is what would provide revenue to keep that website in existence. With the advent of these AI systems, starting with Google's AI overview at the top, uh, and where you are actually being given the answer that synthesizes the search results for you, so you don't have to bother going and clicking on all those nasty links to discover things for yourself. Well, what's the impact on those websites that you might have been going to previously? Well, they're not getting the clicks to see the ads, so they're not getting the ad revenue. What's the consequence? Well, I've noticed, and you probably have too, that a lot of places that used to be free in the sense of ad supported with their content now say, we need you to subscribe before you can see it. Because they're not saying this, but I think behind the scenes, the issue is that they're not getting the revenue from the ad-based economy. And so they got to do something. And then, as we've discussed already, shopping by chatbot, soon with ads, rather than you going and doing a search. Yeah, that's happening. But here's an interesting factoid. Amazon has already sued OpenAI because OpenAI's new uh, web browser with their built-in chatbot will place orders on Amazon on your behalf. And Amazon doesn't like that because they want you to see their ads on their platform to either maybe divert you to a different choice or find something else to add to your basket. And they're arguing that that will degrade the Amazon customer's shopping experience. Whereas OpenAI is saying, on the contrary, we are enhancing that experience by bypassing all that. So watch for that debate to get hot and heavy. And finally, reality checks on rate of adoption and return on investment, as we discussed in the bubble section, are new things. So I'm going to leave you with my spoilers for the whole class, but we'll be talking about more of these. Yes, AI, it's for real. It's a very big deal, and it will be everywhere. It's at a root level, kind of autocomplete on steroids, but really in a much more complicated version with truly mind-boggling results. Incredible upside potential and some significant downside risks. Yep, hallucination and trustworthiness are still big problems. I consider them among the biggest, although not everybody agrees that they're the biggest problem. And there are some ways to mitigate it we'll talk about later. No, it's not going to kill us all, but it's going to kill some people and already has. There are companion bots that are alleged in lawsuits by the family to have been either the direct or proximate cause of a suicide of a loved one. I think there are at least 3 of those cases now. And there are autonomous vehicles that have killed people. We could get more specific on which ones tend to do that more, but we won't do that here. Some of them have a very clean record in that regard, but not all. No, it's not going to take all our jobs, but some for sure. And the jury is still out on how many and how soon. Nope, it's not sentient or conscious, but it's real good at pretending, and it's going to get better at pretending. And the question will become, can we tell the difference? And does it matter? We'll talk about that more in week 3. Yes, I fear it is very likely that AI is going to exacerbate income inequality. And so the question is, will we reach a tipping point either through mass layoffs that is going to trigger a sufficiently strong revolt of the people to change the political calculus on how our system works? I do not know. We will see. I do believe it's going to substantially increase energy use and cost. Energy costs are going up even without AI. And I've seen a bunch of articles on that. It's not just AI, but AI is certainly not going to help that issue. And I think it's likely that we're at least in one bubble, uh, but it's not like tulips. It's not a fad. There is substance there. The argument is over rates of growth and whether the investments are way too optimistic or overextended. And finally, yes, you too might find it very useful. And that will be what we focus on next week as we try to get practical. And I'm going to leave you with what I consider an optimistic note from one of my childhood heroes, Bucky Fuller. We are called to be architects of the future, not its victims. So we'll take some questions and then we'll go on to what the plan is for the rest of the week. So let's see what we've got here. Let's see if I've got the first one here.
I'd say John Peters at
Yeah,
516.
okay, got it. Examples that surprised me in the rapid capability and usefulness. I've been surprised at how good the video tools have gotten, where you can give a type in a prompt and it will create a scene as you have described it, and you can give it a text for a script, and it will create uh, background music and synchronized voice speaking according to what kind of style you want it to have, in pretty much perfect synchrony with excellent uh, visual fidelity. It's pretty impressive stuff. Um, and there's certainly a lot of impressive things that we'll talk about some of them next week, like uh, weather prediction. Google's hurricane model has just this last season ended up being way better than the traditional models. And so that's an example of good news. And in the pharmaceutical area, there's some really exciting things going on as well. Let's see here. If the tech companies are making billions, is there any realistic expectation that the AI growth will slow down? Who will have the power to check them? Well, that's exactly the question that I posed in the what are the boomers worried about? What are the forces that could push back? And in week 3, I have a section called Is the Juggernaut Sustainable? And in that, we talk in more depth about some of those issues like copyright, some of the legal liability issues, some of the resource issues, et cetera, that could slow it down. I don't think anything will stop it, but there are different things that could happen that could slow it down. We'll see. Can we generate images or videos of humans that most viewers believe are real? Yes, absolutely. The latest tools are very much in that category. And in fact, it's been true for a while. I will show you in week 3 a video that I think is a stunning deep fake. Now, it was earlier than some of these latest tools. And in that particular case, it's a video, a fake Morgan Freeman. And they used a very talented Morgan Freeman who sounded like Morgan Freeman in that case. But you'll see that it's very compelling. And there are other examples that you can find of where people are starting to use these tools to create disinformation and deep fakes, especially in politics, to influence elections. And that's happening as we speak. Could the booming AI industry help finance solar panel, wind, fission, and fusion energy projects? Well, that's a really interesting question because uh, the energy to power these new data centers is causing some of the companies to say, we can't depend upon the public grid to give us what we need. So we're going to have to make investments in our own power companies, our own power stations. And some of them are talking about building their own nuclear reactors or contracting to have that done. Others are trying to be more sustainable. There is some evidence that you could actually deploy sufficient capacity with solar and batteries to meet some of their needs for less cost and fewer years than to do like a new nuclear plant. But that's yet to be determined. What concerns me is that the local uh, power rates are determined locally by politicians or officials in these uh, utility companies who are getting huge demand for power from companies and saying, well, we're going to have to charge our ratepayers more. Now, that's a political decision. In Vancouver, BC, they have announced that they will no longer allow their customers to use power for crypto mining. And they have said that if you want to do AI, you're going to have to talk to us and bid on it because we're not going to make the ratepayers pay for your investment in that. And some of that, I think, is happening in the US, but I think there are more places where the ratepayers right now are going to be on the hook for at least some of that AI build out. And that's a political issue that I think the payers should be up in arms about because the IR companies should be paying for the energy they're using as opposed to spreading it across all the ratepayers. How fast is error tolerance declining in large language model development? Do you mean the customer's tolerance for errors? Do you mean we as users are becoming more tolerant of errors? Um, I think that is happening, actually. I think it is, there's a lot of work to try to reduce the rate of hallucination, but it's still uh, to me a very big concern. And I'll share some examples in my own research when I've been using AI where I have caught it in an error and challenged it, and you always get, oh, I'm so sorry. I'll try to do better. Uh, but it is very much the case today that if it's a high stakes issue where you care, like you're submitting a paper or a legal brief, check the results for heaven's sakes. Don't trust what you got from AI. It can be a useful tool to help you summarize documents and generate first drafts, perhaps, but uh, trust a little bit, verify a lot. Is the motto I want to leave you with on that.
Vicky puts in fault tolerance.
Ah, so one of the strategies for dealing with uh, the problem of hallucination is taking pages out of the fault tolerant computing book, which, as some of you are probably aware, means you have different computations running in parallel, and the system has to get a majority vote on what the right answer is before it will move the ailerons on the plane or do some other important control function. Uh, and that is just starting to be used in the AI world through orchestration, where you can have one AI that is orchestrating multiple uh, sub AI models to come up with different answers, and then have them essentially vote or see if there's consensus. So that is starting to be one of the strategies for dealing with the hallucination problem. Can agentic AI be focused also on business processes? Absolutely. And tools kept inside a company's proprietary walls. Yes, that's an active area for consultants to go in and try to do exactly. How would I know if my AI was good at math and art and writing poetry, planning budgets? Well, you could try on the math one, you could ask it to count the number of letters in the sentence you give it. And if it fails that test, you might be suspicious about its ability with numbers. Many of the models have not done very well with that, but there are some that are tuned to math and doing better. And some of them are coming up with very sophisticated proofs of theorems that and doing better than the best math geniuses in the world in some of these annual math competitions and so on. But how you or I would determine off the chart, I don't know. As far as art, that's in the eye of the beholder. Same with poetry. Um, Planning budgets, I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of informal comparing results and say, how did that work for you? Like planning a trip, etc. The one that planned a trip to the Andes to a town that did not exist uh, is probably not the one you want to use, but that has happened. Do you think it will kill or uh, uh, will aid our creativity? Yes, I do think there is a very much an upside from on the creativity side of it, um, and we'll talk about that more next week. Let's see. This is new. For about 25 years back, we've been seeing used complicated algorithms this whole time. They have been just building on previous successes to get what we have now. I've been testing software for 25 years. AI is just an efficient way to market, sell these developments. Yeah, I generally agree. There's obviously been an evolution in software, and some of these developments go back a while. But the generative nature is with the large language models and the transformer architecture are fairly recent, and the scope of what they can do, I think, is I think it qualifies as transformative. Comment on Ray Kurzweil's book and view and projections. Will humans be absorbed by AI on a shared basis or but inferior basis in the next 5 to 10 years? I don't think so. We'll see. I'm a skeptic on Kurzweil's predictions, although he's got a good track record. He's a smart guy. I worked for a guy that was on his advisory board for the very first reading machines. He was a blind engineer, and he's done some good work. But I'm on the skeptic side there. Yes, I also like the label synthetic intelligence. Gates says that fusion nuclear in the next 2 years. Will this resolve inadequate water supply? Okay, next 2 to 5 years. Actually, the water supply problem is interesting because there are solutions to that where you can build a data center that does not use any water. You have to reprocess the water and recycle it, and that takes effort, that takes energy and capital investment, but it can be done. So we'll see. And I suspect that depends on the design of the fusion reactor, but some of those get very hot too and need a lot of cooling. Okay, we talked about fault tolerance. Retired engineer here. During my work as a consultant, I wrote the software that runs inside Sonicare toothbrushes. Fun project. Maybe you can tell me afterwards what the tones mean when I turn it off. Fun project, but my sense is that the jobs like that could probably be done by AI today. That's depressing. Certainly, we're seeing lots of jobs going away in local tech companies. So this gets to the issue of software engineering as a profession and the coding aspect of that, taking a design spec and translating it to code, that's going to go away. But software engineering has always been more than that, involving architecture and understanding the problem space and how things need to be put together. And all of the people I talk to, including professors of computer science at UW, are unanimous that there's still a future in software engineering, just not coding. So I think that takes us to the end of the road here. And with that, I'm going to just let you look in the slides. We'll be talking about the practical benefits next time, and then the big questions week 3. And I'll leave you with that animated real cat, maybe, or is it AI? And this one, which is definitely AI, but still cute. Thank you all for your attention. We'll see you next Thursday.